Hello and welcome. I've been working on a new project that I'm really excited to share with you. The base that I've been working on is a real deer skull, but I've built it up to give it an appearance of when it was alive. I used mesh to add some ears to it, and something interesting I learned is how big their ears actually are. The material I used to cover it up is tile adhesive, a regular one from the hardware store that you simply just mix with some water. Sculpting is not something I do very often, but it was really fun to see the deer come back to life. For the eyes, I simply placed in some styrofoam balls that fit perfectly in the eye sockets. I gave it plenty of time to dry and made sure that the delicate parts such as the ears were thick and strong enough. And then it was time to move on to the next step. I enjoy using porcelain such as old plates and cups to make my mosaics. And this box is just a small part of my collection. Since the deer head has quite a lot of curves, it was best to use some thin cups for it. These ones are going to fit perfectly. In addition, I wanted to use these old gold plates to add some details on the ears and maybe other parts of the face. To cut up the plates, I simply use this wheeled glass nipper. It makes the job super easy and, I must admit, super satisfying. I really love the crunch it makes. Once I've cut the plate into lots of small pieces, I'm then going to use more tile adhesive to stick them into the ear. I'll often use a little spatula to make sure the adhesive is properly distributed. And once I put the pieces on, I make sure to leave a few millimeters of gap in between each one, space for the grout afterwards. Apart from the edge of the ear, where I'm trying to use the edge of the plate, I'm not doing a particular pattern here. I'm simply doing what's called crazy paving. I decided to add some more gold to the face of the deer. This was partly to integrate the antlers into the mosaic, so they weren't just something on top of it, but also simply because gold is lovely. To fill out the rest of this deer's face, I didn't just want to use these beautiful cups completely randomly. I wanted to keep the edges to use on the edge of the ears, and I also wanted to keep part of the flowery pattern connected, even though I do have to cut them up to make them fit properly. One of the most important parts of making your final mosaic look smooth, especially when it's a 3D one, is to make sure that the pieces you use match the curves where you're placing them. It's no good using a huge piece on a small curve, because then it will just stick out and make it look not smooth. On the other hand, when you're working on a flat area, you can also use big pieces to obtain the same smooth effect. It is kind of like assembling a puzzle actually, except here you get to cut and decide what size your pieces are. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I really like mosaics. I've always enjoyed doing puzzles as well. I'll be quiet for a bit now and let you watch the mosaic come to life. At this point I was already super happy with it, but I knew that I had left one of the hardest parts till the end, the eyes. I didn't want to make them too detailed, since the rest of it was quite artistic, but I also didn't want to make it look soulless. I started by giving it a black pupil, and I wasn't quite sure if I liked it, but I tried to continue and see if it would help when I removed the outer white. At this point I did realize though that it was indeed going to look soulless without some white in the eye. So I took one of the pieces out and added white instead. And I was super happy with it, I must say. I left it to dry completely overnight, and then it was time for the most messy part of this process. It's time to grout it. I wouldn't actually usually recommend using white grout for mosaics, because it kind of takes out the colors of your mosaics. But in this case, when I've got mostly white on it, I know that it's going to bind it together. And that's because I've used this color combination before. So trust the process. Once I've added water to the grout powder, I usually just use an old knife to mix it up. I don't use an exact measurement or science for this, I simply go until I think it has the good consistency. When I first started doing mosaic years ago, I remember this part being kind of scary, especially when I was using a darker grout, because next you're just gonna smear it all over your beautiful piece that you've just spent hours making. But don't worry, it'll come back to life even better. While using my fingers here instead of a tool, I should mention that it's actually not the smartest thing to do. While they work really well and I manage to get into all the areas, I do end up with lots of small cuts on my fingers. So it's at your own risk. Once I've gotten the grout into all the cracks and crevices, I'm then going to use a damp sponge to get rid of the most of it on the top. At this stage, I'm not looking to get it completely clean, but just get the most excess off. Getting off the excess will also occasionally reveal spots where you have to just add a little bit extra. A short while later, I'll then come back with just an old piece of fabric, this one is from an old t-shirt, and simply polish up the pieces. You still want to be careful not to completely dig out the grout in the gaps, but as long as you're gentle, it'll be fine. It's much easier to get the majority of the dust off now than rather later when it's more dry. So although you might get impatient and want to finish immediately, it's really good to take your time to polish it completely up. You'll be grateful later. I was already aware of the fact that the white grout would probably create too much division in the black eyes, so I mixed a little bit of black grout just to fill out on the eyes. It was a little bit fiddly, especially trying not to get the black onto the white grout around it, but in the end I think it worked out pretty well. All polished up and dry, it was now ready to go on its piece of wood, ready to mount on the wall. I'm so pleased with this piece, and I must admit it is one of the ones that has been most bittersweet for me to pass over to my customer. But I'm just thankful that they gave me the opportunity to make it for them. And I'm also grateful to you for watching. I'll see you next time.